Good afternoon. My name is Rita Woods. I'm currently the Acting Deputy Director of the Office of Credit Union Resources and Expansion, known as CURE. Welcome, and thank you for attending the FOM2 webinar. Presenting today are Susan Ryan, Acting Director of the Division of Consumer Access, Robert Leonard, Director of Division of Consumer Access, and Rick Mom, Consumer Access Program Officer. Also joining us today will be Marvin Shaw, Staff Attorney from our General Counsel's Office. Sue, Rob, and Rick will discuss and provide information on submitting an application for a community field of membership using the narrative approach. We hope you have received a letter to Federal Credit Unions 18 FCU 02, including the guidance, to use as a reference during this presentation. Before we get started, I have some administrative announcements. Please adjust your computer volume as needed. Drag the bottom right corner to resize for the slide view. Allow for pop-ups. Click Ask a Question on the left corner of the console window. And then in 3 weeks, a closed caption archive of this webinar will be available in our learning management system. Also, please do not forget to fill out the survey at the end of this webinar by clicking the teal color icon. I will now turn the presentation over to Susan Ryan. Thank you.
Thank you, Rita, and good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to start out with an overview of recent changes to the chartering and field of membership manual. Now credit unions will have the flexibility when applying for a community charter conversion or expansion to submit a narrative application with sufficient supporting evidence that establishes the existence of a well-defined local community if the proposed service area does not meet NCUA's presumptive criteria. The agency will now hold a public hearing on a narrative application where the proposed community's population exceeds 2.5 million, and then for metropolitan statistical areas, which we commonly refer to as MSAs, that are subdivided into metropolitan divisions, an applicant can designate a portion of that MSA regardless of the division boundaries, where under prior rule, the community had to stay within a metropolitan division. And just to back up a second, on the narrative applications for public hearings are only going to be held for those applications that come in on narrative applications, not for presumptive criteria. Okay, so the rule became effective on September 1st, 2018, and as Rita mentioned earlier, we issued some written guidance in letter to credit unions. It was 18 FCU-02, and I believe that was issued earlier this month. So this presentation kind of follows along what we previously issued in the guidance, and should be helpful as a reference material for you. Just to keep in mind, too, the narrative approach is an additional option that is available to establish a well-defined local community, and credit unions will still have the option to define their proposed community using presumptive criteria. Okay. So the topics we're going to cover today are types of existing well-defined local communities, and we'll get into that in a little bit, and then communities using the narrative approach. We're going to talk about the 13 narrative criteria, and we refer to it as 13 plus 1 because the 1 is an optional one you can add. We'll get into that in a little bit. But these 13 criteria are defined in Appendix 6 of the chartering manual. And again, we go into it in the guidance that we issued also. We're going to talk about the 3 types of evidence you can include in your narrative application and the relative persuasiveness of each of these types of evidence. And then we'll get into the public hearing process. Okay, so let's start with the existing well-defined local community types. The chartering policy is going to continue to recognize a single political jurisdiction or a portion thereof. Couple things to keep in mind there. When we say single political jurisdiction, it can refer to a town, a city, a county, and there's no population cap when referring to single political jurisdictions. The next type is a core-based statistical area, and those have a population cap of 2.5 million people. Typically, those are MSAs, metropolitan statistical areas, made up of 2 or more counties. Next, we have adjacent areas to a single political jurisdiction or a core-based statistical area. Those are subject to a population cap of 2.5 million people for the entire community, that is. And adjacent areas, the largest adjacent area that we'll recognize is a county. So keep that in mind too. Rural district is the next type of existing local community. Those have a population cap of the greater of 250,000 or 3% of the state's population. And then additional requirements are that more than 50% of the population resides in an area designated as rural. The population density is 100 people or less per square land mile, or the area falls within CFPB's rural county listing. And last but not least, we will continue to recognize areas that NCUA has previously determined as well-defined local communities. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Rick for the next area.
Okay, thank you, Sue. Under the narrative approach, whether you're doing a conversion to a community or an expansion to a community charter, your application must still demonstrate that you have the ability to serve the requested community. That has not changed, and we look at the business plan, marketing plan, and calendar, and at least 2 years of financial projections to determine if you have the ability to serve. And you also have to still show you have the intent to serve the entire community and all of its segments, and that's also demonstrated through your business and marketing plan. Now, a couple things to bear in mind with the narrative approach is that the larger the area you want, whether both geographically and by population, the more difficult it will be to show the area qualifies as a well-defined local community. So if you're looking for an area of at least 3 million people, you're not going to need as much documentation as if you want an area of 5 million people, for example. And you will also have to, the more support you'll also have to provide to support the area you're looking for. Now, there are 3 types of evidence that can be included in a community package, a narrative package. That's third party. That would be anybody other than the credit union. There's anecdotal knowledge and evidence through inference, and we'll go through each of those in more detail right now. Third-party evidence includes, but is not limited to, statistical evidence, studies, research papers, economic and other reports and articles. Examples, this could be the Census Bureau has a lot of statistical data to help support a community. It could be other government or state and local government agencies. They often publish statistical data and various reports you can use. Colleges, universities, businesses, business trade organizations, community organizations, and local periodicals such as journals, magazines, and newspapers also publish evidence about the areas that you can use as third-party evidence, and any evidence you provide through this means is the most persuasive on a narrative community package. One of the least persuasive evidence that you can provide is the anecdotal evidence, and usually that is the evidence you provide based on your familiarity and observations of living in the area. It's not provable fact. Often anecdotal evidence is just what you gained from living in an area your whole life or for many years. You know, like, you know, it always rains on Tuesday or something like that. So, or it's always cloudy. You know, that would be types of anecdotal evidence, something that's by observation because you live in the area. And that is the least persuasive of all evidence. Another evidence is evidence by inference, which offers a conclusion based on known facts in the area. Generally, evidence by inference is not as persuasive as third party. It is more persuasive than anecdotal data. And inference can be a little tricky because depending on what it is and where you're at, evidence by inference may be very persuasive in one area, but in another area it may not be persuasive at all. So you really have to be mindful of that when you're putting together your narrative application for a well-defined local community.
Okay, so just to summarize this a little bit, the most persuasive narrative applications are going to explain, document, and summarize how the community meets the standard of interaction and common interests. Less effective applications are just going to list the items or provide references, and without explaining why it's significant, it doesn't tie in, it doesn't explain how it all ties together, and it's just not a persuasive application. So make sure, you know, if you're putting together a package that you don't just list out your data, you include a explanation and summarize it and how it supports the entire community. Okay, on the next slide here, we've listed out the 13 plus 1 narrative criteria that identifies a well-defined community. I'm not going to read them all off because you can see them all. And again, they're in Appendix 6 of the Chartering Manual. They're discussed in the guidance. So please refer to that. We're going to discuss each of them in a little more detail coming up. But I wanted to highlight number 14, that's our plus 1 there. Any other supportive criteria. So keep in mind your application does not need to just include those 13 listed and discussed criteria. If you have other data or areas that support a local community, please include them in the application.
Excuse me, Sue. Are those listed in order of importance?
Not necessarily, but the number 1, the Central Economic Hub, it's going to be difficult to prove a local community if you can't prove a Central Economic Hub. So keep in mind that one's very important. I'm not saying you can't do it without that, but that one is especially important.
Okay, now would you be penalized if you don't include all 13, if you only have 10, 11?
No, and that kind of brings us to the next slide. That the narrative criteria is going to be evaluated based on the totality of the circumstances. So there may be some of these criteria that don't apply to your community, and it doesn't mean that you're not going to prove a community, but we will evaluate it based on the totality of the circumstances.
Okay, thank you.
Rob?
Okay, yes, well, thank you. Yeah, thank you, Sue and Rick and Rita. What I'd like to do now is take an opportunity to begin the process of going over each of the 13 narrative criteria, and we'll talk a little bit about the plus 1 as well. The first one is, Sue had mentioned, the Central Economic Hub is one of the most important of all the criteria, because once there is a Central Economic Hub, a lot of the other factors kind of fall into place as a result of that hub being present in terms of sharing facilities, commuting patterns, common shopping areas, common other things of great importance. So what we wanted to do is just walk through an example of, on each of the criteria that we're going to go over, we're giving you a hierarchy in general terms of what we would consider to be the most persuasive, or some based on our experience that is not persuasive. And these are just general guidelines that you can follow. We also, again, encourage you to refer to the letter to credit unions that just went out, where we provide information regarding the narrative approach in greater detail. So just, because of the time, we can't go over all of them today in great detail. We will go over this one in detail, and the others will be more of a cursory review. So anyway, I'm sorry, if you could kindly go back to the last one. Okay. On the Central Economic Hub, what we find is most persuasive in a given area, if 25% of the jobs or the workers go to one of the counties in the area, in a multi-county area, that would be very persuasive that there is an economic hub, because the commuting patterns are demonstrating commonality among where they work, and then that, of course, would lead to the development of other factors. And then as the hierarchy goes down, 15% is compelling, but certainly not as compelling as a 25%. And then when it gets below 15%, it becomes very, it doesn't become that significant in terms of our approach. All right, now if we kindly go to the next slide. We wanted to give a practical example of how to support that there is a central economic hub. And this, we talked about before, the different types of information, whether it would be based on third-party data or whether it would be based on anecdotal evidence or knowledge of an area or an inference. This is going to walk through an example of where you're using third-party data to support the interaction or common interest necessary to show that a factor is sustainable. So in this case, we're going to use the Central Economic Hub and then demonstrating that the local jobs in an area cluster in a given area. And then what we're using on this slide that you'll see there's a link to the census's website where we can get objective information derived from the census and their research, talking about commuting flows from county to county workplace. What we're going to do is I'm going to walk through two examples. One, showing a very persuasive case for an economic hub, and then the second, to give a spoiler alert, where it is not a compelling case. So this is a compelling case. We took three hypothetical counties, A, B, C, D, E, F, and GHI. These are just, totally made up counties, so don't read anything into the name selection. So what we do in this case, if the census research shows us that if you're in the first column after the name, you see the total workers who live in the county, and then how many, the table then shows how many live or work in their home county where they live, and then how many would work in DEF county. So if you look at the top county, ABC, 40% of the people who work stay in their home county, but an even higher number, 48%, go to DEF county to work, and then 10.9% work elsewhere. And then in DEF county, of course, it's the same county, so 89% remain there and stay in DEF county. And then the third county on the bottom, what this table would show us here in this example is 222,000 workers, 60% stay in their own county, but 38% of those who don't stay go to DEF county. So if you look at that column, it's the third from the right. You have a case of 48% of the people in one county go to DEF, 89% go in to stay in DEF, and 38% of GHI go to DEF. It shows that DEF county, or the second one, is a major drawing card for employment. And it really does show some compelling third-party data where residents of a county or an area travel to a single focal point. All right, now if we could go to the next slide, please. This is an example, again, using these three hypothetical counties where the evidence is not persuasive. If you look again, if we have the example of DEF county, again, 89% of the people stay there. But in the remaining counties, the first one, only 8% go to DEF to work. and in the last one only 9% go to county. I mean, that shows some dependence on DEF, but not at the level as shown in the first slide. And it could also show that they're either tend to be dependent on their own county, or that they may even, like in the case of the last one, GHI, 30% go elsewhere. So there could be another focal point that one relies on. Rather than traveling to the DEF county, in this case, rather than traveling there, they may travel elsewhere for their needs, a different hub. So that's an example of third parties showing that there may not be an economic hub in an area. So we just wanted to walk through to show what one would look like, and we'd now like to go over the remaining factors and the remaining factors in general as a general overview. So I'll turn it over to Rick.
Okay, thank you, Rob. Quasi-government agencies are typically organizations set up by local governments. They include economic development commissions, regional planning boards, labor or transportation districts, and we can use those as a means to help show the area qualifies as a well-defined local community. For the most persuasive, it isn't necessarily the number of how many quasi-government agencies there are, but whether those agencies cover the same area that you're looking at for the well-defined community, and is the leadership of each of those agencies or organizations made up of people from within the community. And when you go down the scale, if there are some quasi-government agencies, but they only cover a portion of the proposed area, or have its leadership not from that area, that's the least persuasive. So you kind of have that sliding scale there. Now, the next thing is government designations, and government designations are regions or districts set up by a government agency. It can include a regional transportation district, a water district, a tourism district. An example would be the agency's own regional, different regions. That would be a kind of a government designation. So you can have the designations, whether it's federal, state, or local, that cover that area. And it's, again, the most persuasive is, does those designated areas, regions, cover the entire area that you're looking for? And then going down the, sliding down the scale, the least persuasive is, it only covers a portion or very little of the area. So you just need to, in both of those, kind of look to see how much of the area do they cover and encompass based on what you're looking to apply for.
Say, Rick, we want to remind our audience to submit their questions throughout the webinar. So use the Ask a Question feature on your console. Thanks.
Okay. Now, I'd like to talk a little bit about shared and public facilities. That can also be a very good example of showing how residents mutually depend upon one another through interaction or common interests. What we found in the past in cases that has been very persuasive for us is if there is evidence, if obtain statistical evidence showing how residents of the entire proposed service area would mutually benefit from a public facility. For example, an airport. An airport could be a good example if there are statistics about enplanements, for example, of how many residents use the airport. If it can show a mutual dependence among all counties within a given area, that can be a very persuasive way of demonstrating interaction and common interests. Another case, if statistical evidence isn't available, if there's some type of formal agreement in place where a public service such as police or fire protection, if there is a type of agreement where the coverage area of local institutions providing those services would transcend traditional county lines and agree to help each other in times of emergency. So formal agreements of that nature are also very persuasive in cases where they're involved in the entire area. It gets a little bit less persuasive if it's not involved in the entire area, but if it covers the majority of the population, but not the area in entirety, it still can be persuasive. Most likely, we would probably use that as one variable in consideration, again, going over the totality. And then what wouldn't be persuasive is just merely stating that they exist without some kind of idea of how the facility would correlate to the entire area. Okay. All right, another important factor that we've used in the past are hospitals and major medical facilities. And what would be persuasive, again, if there is, I mean, in a very traditional model, if one county has the hospital facilities where the outlying counties all must travel to for major medical needs, or if there are statistics to show something of that nature, that's a very persuasive example of interdependence upon a single hospital facility. It would also be persuasive if there is no statistical data available, but if they can demonstrate through other means that that is the only facility in the area, that would be a viable option for a significant portion of the residents, that can be persuasive. And it would be not persuasive if the area has multiple healthcare facilities under different administrations and different leadership with dispersed locations all over each individual county within the area. Then it would tend not to be persuasive to show commonality of healthcare where they would have common interests in that realm. So we just wanted to touch upon that. And Rick, if you'd like to talk about colleges. Okay, colleges and universities can also be something that's very persuasive in improving community through the narrative approach. Some of the things to bear in mind in the colleges and universities is you need to discuss all of the colleges and universities in the proposed area, not just the largest one that's there. And you also have to be mindful, especially if there is just a real large one, that they often draw people from all over the country, if not the world, as students. So when you're looking at colleges and universities, the most persuasive is statistical data from the college or university itself that says where they're drawing their students from. Is it within the proposed community you're looking for or outside? If the statistical data isn't available, you can also look at, does the college and university, do they collaborate with the local governments in the area? And then like community colleges, private colleges and all that, discuss them, and, a lot of them will reach out and interact into the community. But again, the most persuasive is the actual statistical data showing where they draw their students from.
So Rick, backing up a minute, like talking about hospitals, colleges, universities, if we can't get, if a credit union can't get statistics, can you maybe expand upon a little bit how if they've expanded, the facility has actually expanded into the proposed community, how we're going to look at that as far as evidence?
That's a good question, Sue.
Such as like, I'm thinking along the lines of like satellite offices or other campuses to a university, that kind of thing.
Yes, that could be very persuasive and helpful if they have, extended degree programs and they've put various campuses throughout the community.
Right.
Because, that does show, usually extended degree programs are reaching out to the older students that may have families, already have a career, they're going at night, and, they can't commute, they usually aren't coming in from elsewhere. So, things like that could be very persuasive and beneficial to address that in their packages. So, yes. So, good. So the other, mutual aid. Mutual aid agreements, the most persuasive on mutual aid agreement is you actually get the agreement that shows that they are providing, one county government agency, police, fire is where you typically see that. They are providing that to another city in the proposed community. Typically, from our experience, we see these more in rural areas and not so much in very large metropolitan areas. That doesn't mean there are none. It's just our experience just shows we haven't seen many of that outside of the rural areas. But, again, the most persuasive is the actual agreement or a press release, something like that, that actually announces it and shows it has it. The least persuasive is it's just common knowledge that we're getting our fire or police services from the next county over. Something like that would not be as persuasive as the actual documentation.
Great. All right. The next slide, organizations and clubs. There should be more detail on this slide. Yes. Okay, that's it. Yes, that can be a good example of showing interaction in an area. The organization or club could be based on any number of different things, whether it's a charitable endeavor, cultural, or just purely social or fraternal. The existence of those types of clubs can be compelling. Again, going along our hierarchy, it would be most persuasive if there was good hard statistical data supporting the organization as meaningful objectives. An organization with meaningful objectives serves the entire community. It would also be persuasive if other qualitative documentation would exist, if not the pure statistics, but other to demonstrate how they serve the entire community. And then what would not be persuasive is just merely a list of organizations without showing the relevance or the objectives to show how it would be meaningful to the entire area. Okay, if we go to the next slide, please. Another good example of showing common interest in an area would be the community newspaper. If an area has just one newspaper and there's statistical evidence indicating that a significant percentage of its subscribers come from each locale within the proposed community, that can be very strong evidence. Or if the paper has a local news section that focuses on the community, or if they have a target marketing area that would be consistent with the boundaries of the community, that's very persuasive. The next level would be if there's local newspapers or periodicals that would cater to the proposed community. In other words, the hard statistical evidence may not be available, but there is evidence in terms of the content or the mission of these types of written documents would indicate another level of persuasiveness. And then again, just merely listing the newspapers would tend not to be persuasive, because it wouldn't allow us to understand the relevance of how it would support either common interests, and most likely in this area, or it would just pretty much be common interests. So, okay, thank you.
Okay, the entertainment and sporting events is actually can be a very excellent one for showing common interests and interactions within the residents of a well-defined local community, because they tend to bring a lot of people together into one place. And this can include not only if there's major league teams like football, baseball, hockey, basketball, minor league teams, colleges. It can also include, you get the ice capades, the circus, the big wheels, whatever monster trucks, whatever comes to town that, or the festivals or food fairs or whatever that are in town, all of that can bring a lot of people together. With that being said, you need more than just a list of, a big long list. We have 4 sports teams, 3 minor leagues, 4 college, just listing all of the various events and that in the community is not that persuasive. You really need the statistical data to show where the club or the event is drawing the people from. For instance, on baseball, you hear that the team drew 3 million people for the year. Well, just saying 3 million people is not the most persuasive, because a lot of those 3 million people were tourists that come to town, or if the team has a real regional following, they could be attracting people from areas outside of the community. So you really, to be real persuasive for sporting events and that, you really need to get the statistical data where they're drawing the attendees from, and then just giving a list. Well, if you have a large list, that's better not having anything at all, but it's not really the most persuasive data you can provide. On next slide, please. Local television and radio stations, again, this could be a persuasive, because they're going to tend to cover the area where you live. But again, getting statistical data showing where they are drawing their audiences is the most persuasive. Just listing, going down the list or the scale, just listing the number of television and radio stations in the area is not real persuasive. That'd be kind of an anecdotal data saying, here they are, they broadcast to our area, therefore, it promotes interaction. While that may be true, that's not real persuasive. But if you have the statistical data, or you can get some information on where they're drawing their advertising dollars from, if all of those are coming from within the community, that could help show that it falls more into the persuasive than a non-persuasive category. Okay, going on. Shopping. This is, it can be persuasive. Again, you need statistical data. And shopping is more than just saying we've got 1 or 2 malls and listing all the big box retailers. Shopping is all the shopping retail businesses in the area. So really the best source of data is, we have seen chambers of commerce or local economic offices publish, the amount of retail dollars that are spent in the community and where those dollars are coming from. That is very persuasive data to support that the shopping for the well-defined local community. Not persuasive is if all you're going to give us is, like I said, list the number of malls, the larger strip malls, and all the big box retailers, and the fact that they're spread throughout the community is not persuasive to show that the area qualifies as a well-defined local community based on shopping patterns.
All right, and our final of the 13 is geography or geographic characteristics of an area. At times, the common interests or interaction in an area can kind of be forced by its geographic characteristics. For example, if an area is geographically isolated from other areas, such as a mountainous area or a heavy forested area, that can often influence all of the institutions that have flowed from that geographic fate, if you will, on that. So that can be very persuasive on that, or if there's bodies of water surrounding an area, that can be persuasive. Or if there's a certain feature that can attract tourism for a given area, that can also be persuasive evidence of interaction or common interest, supporting that the area is a local community. For example, if a geographic feature of an area is beachfronts, that can be a common dependence on tourism for a local economy. That also can be persuasive. And then if of course, if the geographic features do not influence other characteristics, then it probably wouldn't be applicable in that one case. So, next one, please. Okay, and then we talked about 13, but of course we'd like to give also a bonus for everyone that stuck around this long. No. What we'd like to offer is that there are always going to be factors that we have not considered on that. So if you have something that's so unique to your area that really drives home the point that people collectively interact or share common interests because of it, we would, of course, be very willing to consider that as a part of our review process. So you're not limited to just the 13. You don't have to address all of the 13. But if there's something that doesn't fit within that 13 and you feel it's compelling, by all means, please include that with your application and the documentation. And then that would allow us to consider an area with unique characteristics in a fair context. So we just wanted to offer that as a possibility, and we would be glad to look at it.
Okay, so just to kind of recap and shed some light on NCUA's perspective. So when we're looking at an application, we're going to evaluate the evidence that is submitted by the credit union to determine if the area qualifies as a well-defined local community. We also have the responsibility to consider not only the evidence that supports it, but evidence that does not support a well-defined local community. So I guess as an example I can provide, possibly if there's a community, a proposed community that has more than one economic hub, it's difficult to support that it is one local community if you have two economic hubs there, and the inferential evidence then becomes very weak. So, we do have to consider that side of things. And we can only base our final decision on the documented evidence that is received with the application. So, I refer you back to a slide we talked about a few back where don't just list your evidence, make sure you explain it and summarize it so it all ties together. I want to go on now, and Rob's going to give us a little background on the public hearing process.
Okay, well, thank you, Sue. This is, of course, new territory for us as an agency because this just went into effect with the new policy when the new policy became effective in September. But this public hearing is, I guess you could describe it as our last data gathering process for a complicated application where an applicant desires serving a community with over 2.5 million in population. Of course, this would be for multiple political jurisdictions. If a single county has more than 2.5 million, that wouldn't be applicable here because that is by default a community by being a single political jurisdiction. But this applies to multiple counties over 2.5 million. Well, what that would do is when we get to a case like that, when we're ready to go to this last stage of our data gathering process, we would publish a notice in the Federal Register inviting people to comment on the application, strictly the community characteristics of a given area. And then we would provide in this notice to the Federal Register of any interested party would be able to submit written comments to a mailbox within 7 days before the date of the public hearing. Or an interested party can also request appearing in person at the public hearing. And then the way we would envision these hearings taking place is there would be 8 presentations limited to 30 minutes apiece, 30 minutes apiece. And then the first slot would be for the applicant. The second for 7th through the 7th slots would be the first 6 interested parties to notify us. It'd be a first come, first served. And then the 8th slot, our agency would reserve at its discretion to select somebody from among interested parties if they're not part of the first 6 requests. The goal of us reserving that would be to ensure that we're getting balanced representation and hearing the pros and cons of whether or not the given area is a local community. So next one, please. Yes, so the location, again, we would evaluate on what would make the most sense on a case-by-case basis, but it would be either here in our headquarters in Alexandria or within the proposed community itself. And again, the way this would, the mechanics of this is it would be a public hearing notice in the Federal Register so that basically anybody, any interested party could read that, determine how they want to participate. And then as far as us on the day itself, NCUA would appoint a presiding officer to oversee and conduct the hearing. NCUA would take minutes of the meeting, and then this would, by taking minutes of what all of the people making comments would say during the meeting, we would have a record to consider as part of our administrative record in determining whether or not the area is a local community. And then after having all of this information presented to us, combined with what the applicant has provided beforehand, of course it would take some time to review all of that, so no sooner than 30 days after the hearing itself, we would make a determination on the community application. So again, it's basically a final data gathering, if you will, for us for that aspect of it. This doesn't change any of the other requirements with the business and marketing plan. You know, we would continue to review that as we have been with others, just to make sure that credit unions have the ability and intent to serve the area they desire serving. So, next one, please. Oh, okay.
So here's a slide that shows all our contact information, various topics. I would highlight probably the third one down, DCA mail at ncua.gov. That is the Division of Consumer Access, and we typically handle all the community field and membership expansion. So any follow-up or questions, go ahead and email to DCA mail. And with that, I think we'll turn it over to Jessica, who can facilitate our question session.
Thanks, Sue. So Jim and Melissa, do we have any questions?
Yes, we do have some questions that pertain to this topic specifically. And first question is, in our application, can we provide links to information instead of printing or attaching it?
I would say our suggestion would be not, just links aren't going to be acceptable. Certainly include all the data or the printed material that is associated with that link, and cite the information with the link, but also, again, make sure you're summarizing why it's important. So no, just providing a list of links is not going to be persuasive.
Yeah. I'd like to add, too, on that of course, if it's if you don't have control of the website can change over time. So if by sending the documentation of what's on the link at the present time, it gives a good record to refer back to see why we thought something was or wasn't persuasive.
For our next question regards television and radio stations. And the question is, can we use data showing advertisements directed to the residents in the proposed community or performed by businesses in the proposed community?
I would say yes, you could. I wouldn't rely totally on that only, but that could be data you could use that would be persuasive, yes.
Okay. You talked about the +1. Can we include in our application more than one set of additional data?
Yes, if it's appropriate for the area, yes. It's not limited to just one other. It would be any number that's appropriate. So.
Okay. Our next question, credit union has a single county that they're serving. That county includes a couple of colleges. If they have data showing that students come from an adjacent county that they wish to add to their community, is that compelling evidence of interaction that they're drawing students into this county from an adjacent county?
Absolutely, yeah, that's definitely supportive. You know, not by itself, but with other criteria, yeah, it's definitely can be considered persuasive.
Sure.
Okay, can a credit union submit more than one proposed area? For example, can you submit for one county and then submit for a second county?
I'm assuming they're talking about adjacent areas, or are they?
Based on the question, it sounds like an adjacent area, which is outside of, is a different type of application. It's not one that falls under the narrative. The narrative,
well, yeah,
you have to have a narrative for an adjacent,
yes.
but it's...
The test is a little bit different. With an adjacent area, one adjacent area, you're basically trying to demonstrate how that adjacent area interacts or shares common interests with the adjacent core. Whereas what we're talking about over this would be showing how all of the areas or locales collectively interact or share common interests. Marv, I don't know if you want
That's true. The adjacent county was the provision that was part of FOM 1. Now we're in this teleseminar talking about FOM 2, so it's slightly different, and Rob summarized it correctly.
And also with the adjacent area, they're going to be limited to a population cap of 2.5, where the narrative that...
Precisely. Right. That's a good point.
Yeah.
Which actually leads us right into our next question on the population limit, which is, does the 2.5 million include the existing field of membership, or is it just the area, the proposed expansion area, but the community expansion?
No, it's the whole community.
Yeah.
If NCUA has already awarded a service area that we would also be applying for, are we able to simply reference that, like an adjacent area?
So if NCUA has already shown the area as a local community, all you would need to do then is just merely reference it.
And submit a business and marketing plan showing your ability and intent to serve.
Yeah, again, that doesn't change. Yeah, good point.
And it would have to be exactly the same?
Exactly, yeah.
Can you explain a little more about what constitutes a single political jurisdiction versus, say, multiple counties?
So a single political jurisdiction, the largest is going to be a county, the largest area. It could be a town, city, could be, you know, a portion thereof a county, which could be a few towns or
School
cities
district.
or census tracts. But the largest geographical area is going to be a county. Multiple counties often make up metropolitan statistical areas, or could possibly qualify as a rural district, depending on where it is in the population limits.
Okay, so we're almost out of time. We may have time for one or two more. Also, for those tuning in, we just want to remind you, don't forget to complete the survey.
Yes, in fact, we only have one more question that I can see here. So if you have additional ones coming in, feel free to send them. Does NCUA have a list of areas previously determined as being well-defined local communities?
Yeah, every month we publish a report It's called the Insurance Report of Activity, that or the IRA, of course we love our acronyms. But each month we would report everything that's been approved as a community, any community area we've approved. So you can either get it off of that list, or, I mean, as a practical matter, you could just simply call us and give us the area. We'd be glad to tell you what we have done in the past. It might be easier for us to do it than have you go through months of data, where we could do it with a fairly simple query of ours. So that would probably be the best practical way. But if you had a good idea of approximate dates, though, of when another one was approved, we do publish that monthly as a matter of public record.
We have another question here regarding counties, and if you have two counties, do they have to be contiguous or adjacent, or can a credit union apply for two separate counties in different parts of the state?
No, they have to be contiguous. If you have two contiguous counties and you can show it's a well-defined local community, but one county's in one state and another county's in the other state, that's okay, but they have to be contiguous counties regardless.
Okay, so we're about to conclude our webinar. We would like to thank Rob, Rick, and Sue for their expertise on this topic. We also want to thank Franz for being our IT support person for the webinar. And also to our audience, we want to thank you all for tuning in. The webinar will be posted in about 3 weeks on NCUA.gov and our Learning Management Service, which is available to credit unions. Until next time, you all have a wonderful week.